Hey, welcome to I Was Just Thinking. This is Rudy Maxey, your genial travel show journalist and radio host, and in this case, webcast host. Nice to have you with me. We're talking to you today on Thursday, January 13th of 2021. So keep that in mind if you're watching this later on YouTube or on Facebook, that we are still in the COVID travel era. It is mid-January, January 13th, 2021. So our references to anything having to do with COVID ought to be viewed in that light. You might remember back in 2015, a pilot for an airline called Germanwings flew his aircraft into the side of a mountain in Europe. Turns out the pilot had been treated earlier for suicidal tendencies and declared unfit to work by his doctor, but the airline never knew that, which raises the question, is your pilot mentally stable? And that is exactly the question asked by my guest today. Her name is Renee O'Shaughnessy, and she is a commercial airline pilot. She flew for many years for FedEx. We'll ask her a little about that. And she has a book titled, This Is Your Captain Speaking, What You Should Know About Your Pilot's Mental Health. She has spent years researching chronic stress, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and other factors that can influence a pilot's decisions and wisdom while flying. She thinks there ought to be some major changes in that. We're going to talk to her about that. So let's bring Renee O'Shaughnessy in, and we'll begin. Renee, hi. How are you?
Hi, Rudy. I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
And where are we reaching you today?
Today I'm in northern Florida.
Okay, and I'm in a little further south in Naples, Florida, but I normally live in St. Paul, and you normally live in the Pittsburgh area, correct?
That's correct.
But we're just trying to get a little warmth here in January. So we will put up a cover of your book during the course of this. But first, give us. There it is. This is Your Captain Speaking by Renee. You do pronounce your name Renee, right?
It is Renee O'Shaughnessy. That's correct.
That's right. The R-E-Y-N with the I don't know. I speak German. It would be an umlaut. But the what are they? Aigu. What is that? Accent aigu in French? They call it.
Accent aigu. That is correct.
Okay, so that's Renee's book. She is the author of this book. And tell us, let's start with your background. I know you flew for FedEx, but where are you from? How did you get into flying? When did you become a commercial pilot? How long did you fly for FedEx, etc.?
Oh, all good questions, Rudy. Thanks. Well, I was raised in a mid-Atlantic small town north of Pittsburgh. I had a traditional...
Small town of what? Where was it? Where?
I lived in a small town north of Pittsburgh,
okay,
called Swickley.
Yep.
And I came from a very traditional family where the father worked outside of the home and mom worked inside of the home. And I was the oldest of two children. I have a younger brother. And very early, my parents recognized that I had some character strengths as well as character flaws. And we won't talk about the flaws today.
Right.
But two of my top 5 character strengths are curiosity and the love of learning. So as I evolved into the person I am today, I use this character strengths to get me to the goals and navigate the obstacles in my life, including education and getting to be a commercial airline pilot back in 1987, when there weren't very many women flying jets. My tenacity certainly did pay off, but it was a long, hard road. And it was one that I really enjoyed, but it was against all odds that I would succeed. So
can I interrupt you just for a moment, Renee? Did you have an interest in aviation in high school? Did you go watch airplanes land at airports? Did you start as a pilot, piloting small planes and taking lessons? How did you go from being a curious child to an airline pilot?
Well, the curiosity piqued my interest in airplanes. Being from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there was a little airline called Allegheny Airlines.
Sure.
I don't know if you remember that.
Sure, before U.S. Airways took it over, yes.
Correct. So my friends were all children of Allegheny Airlines employees. So I thought, wow, this is really interesting how they get to travel all around the world. And so I went into a jet one day, looked in the cockpit, looked in the back and said, you know, that's nice to be in the back working, but it's nicer to be in the front working. So I think that drove me to take my first little civilian airplane ride at the Beaver County Airport, which is a little north of Pittsburgh. And once I took my first ride, I was hooked.
So did you start with lessons in small planes just to learn how to fly?
Absolutely. I'm a civilian pilot, so I started in a Tomahawk, then went to a Piper, and then went to a Cessna, and then, you know, the airline industry is very cyclic. And even though I had my sights set on being an airline pilot, not a corporate pilot, but an airline pilot, I was very lucky that the cycle was on the upswing to hire pilots at commuters.
Okay.
They were searching for pilots and commuters.
And you started as a commuter pilot then?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's where I accumulated all my hours.
Got it. All right. And how long did you fly for FedEx?
I've worked for FedEx for 35 years. And
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and recently retired just in September. It was a wonderful, fulfilling career.
Let me just ask you before we get into the subject of this is your captain speaking and what your passion is right now, which is dealing with issues regarding pilots. I have the impression that FedEx pilots are flying all night because I'm taking my packages places during the day and then they wind up somewhere else in the morning. Was this a 35 years of flying all night all the time?
Oh, that's a longer story, but yes, FedEx, when I started back 100 years ago, well, not really 100 years ago, 35 years ago, predominantly we flew all night long.
Okay.
But since then, and the explosion of e-commerce and now the pandemic has took FedEx into a 24/7 operation. So we have daylight flights, we have afternoon flights, we have evening flights that fly all night long. So there's a wide variety. And I forgot to mention my background in airplanes. My first airplane was a 747. Then I flew the 727, Airbus 310, 300. And then when I retired as a captain on a Boeing 767.
Wow. And were you flying internationally at all or mostly domestically?
Yes, when my children were small, I stayed domestic, but then I had bouts of going in and out of Europe. I didn't do too much Asia. On the 747, when I was on that airplane, it really impacted my health.
I mean, that's a tough schedule. All right. So we have established your bona fides as an airline captain and as a very experienced pilot. When did you start thinking about or even noticing that, you know, a pilot's mental health or whatever might be something of interest or an issue or a problem or an opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So how did I get interested in the topic kind of plays into why I wrote the book. And there's two answers to that question. One's personal and one's professional. So writing this book was more than a project to me. It was a labor of love. And I have a unique and up-close perspective of mental health in the airline industry. Pilots struggle with mental health more than is realized by the public, the regulators, and the industry.
When did you realize this?
I realized this because
When and how? Yeah.
through hundreds and hundreds of hours talking to pilots in and outside of the cockpit,
Okay.
and experts who deal strictly with aviation professionals, and my own experience with mental health, which I talk about in the book.
Right. Okay. So you grew interested in that but you really got serious and you've now, I mean, you started, should we call it a company or
Yeah.
can you describe that for us? And then let's talk about specific, I mean, I know I opened the show with a dramatic example of that German wings flight that flew into the mountain. That obviously doesn't happen, you know, I mean, every year or every decade for that matter. It's a dramatic example, but there are other examples that you have in your book. Okay, so let's talk about those for a minute and put aside what you're that you're working on now, what you're doing now. We'll get to that in a minute. But there are other examples of that, less dramatic, aren't there?
There are, and everyone looks at the big accidents.
Sure.
The German wings, the Tenerife.
I forgot Tenerife, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the landing in the Hudson, which Sully did, beautifully.
And then the commuter flight in Buffalo that crashed.
The commuter flight, and the Culligan flight.
The Culligan flight. Right.
So, we have those accidents, but we have many incidences that don't result in an accident. And then on top of those, there are things that happen in daily cockpit life that, even though they don't create an accident, they impact performance in the airplane.
Yeah, you in your book explain that as a pilot, and I guess this is system-wide, whether you're flying for FedEx or American or Delta or United, twice a year you have to undergo a physical, and a good medical professional will say, having any problems, you feeling depressed, any sort of thing. Is that correct, first of all?
That is absolutely correct. And if I may give you just a little background of what pilots do, that might be, a little help to your audience. But, right now in America, there are 660,000 pilots in the US that function one of the most complicated systems that humans have ever created, and that is the aerospace system. And that allows for safe transport of some 2.2 million people a day.
Wow, yeah.
And not to mention about 150 general aviation aircraft flights in operation. And the way that this system is able to achieve is a remarkable feat, and is related to a federally regulated standards. And what that means is that pilots, based on their flying duties, are required to meet a certain standards, and these standards are well laid out in the medical guidelines and policies. And in the U.S., an aeromedical examiner, who is a physician that usually does not work for the FAA, is charged with evaluating the pilots meeting these minimum standards. And these minimum standards are evaluated every 6 to 12 months. So, right. So now, if a pilot develops a new condition or a new symptom, and the AME determines that minimum requirements are not met, that pilot runs into the risk of temporarily or permanently losing their medical certificate.
Which, as you would logically write and know, somebody might be a little reluctant to be honest with that doctor if they're having some emotional difficulties. I mean, it could be everything, your wife just left you for your best friend, or you're having financial troubles or drug troubles or addiction troubles of some sort. As a pilot, that if you bring it up during that physical, not good things are going to happen. You might lose your license. You might even lose your profession. Oh, by the way, I should also say, while we're talking about physical situations, Renee has been fighting for several days a severe case of laryngitis. It's not COVID, it's just laryngitis. In fact, until this morning, we weren't sure she could do this today. So she has that great, sexy, husky Lauren Bacall voice now. But she says it's not painful to talk. But anyway, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, Renee. Okay, so you've got these pilots having these physicals, which sounds great on paper. Good. Every 6 weeks or every 6 months, every year they have these physicals. But being totally honest, if there's something you need to be totally honest about, can have bad consequences on your career, either temporarily or permanently. That's the nub of it, isn't it?
That's right. And, I'll just kind of echo what you said. That's the kicker. The kicker is that if a pilot develops a new symptom for a new condition, they have to self-identify themselves and take themselves off of duty until they get it checked out. Now, of course, in theory, like you said, this works right. You know, when pilots are healthy, they fly. When a pilot isn't healthy, they don't fly. And that perception may be supported in part with the proportion of pilots and the proportion of general public who view pilots like they are superhuman.
Right.
And they don't get medical care. And they know if they go to get medical care that it could impact their livelihood.
And I know there's no way to measure what proportion of pilots might hold things back versus those who don't. But how have you had pilots say to you, well, I didn't really tell them about this, or, you know, or have pilots advise you maybe when you were a younger pilot, listen, don't, you know, if you're having some marital problems with the kids or what, you know, don't mention that because blah, blah, blah.
Well, many of the stories, and I can't be specific because of course that's in confidence, but we suffer with finances, divorce, naughty kids, teenage kids, elderly parents, depression, anxiety, insomnia, just like everyone else. And the stories, you know, are real. And they affected me to the point that I felt that I needed to be a voice for the voiceless.
Did you ever reach a point where you thought you ought to take a little break from flying because of your emotional or mental state?
Thanks for asking. When I turned 50, I had an aha moment. And I went in for a routine checkup, and my blood pressure was 190 over 170. And I was in intimate danger of having a stroke. And the doctor came in and said, you're being transported to the hospital. And I looked at her and I stood up and I put my hands on my hips and I said, I'm a very busy woman.
I got planes to fly. I got planes to fly.
I don't have time for this.
Right.
And she said, well, you're going to go to the hospital. And I write about this more in the book, and I won't take your time up and tell you about the rest of the story. But that was my pivoting point, my own health crisis and the crisis of others in my profession. I want to just shout out to the entire aviation community that we can work together in finding solutions. And it starts with the changing of the regulation and the legislations in this regulated world, but it also starts with awareness, bringing awareness to your own life and being honest.
But of course, you didn't really probably know your blood pressure is that high, because unless you're checking it regularly, your blood pressure doesn't exactly tell you until you keel over or something that things are bad. So, and I know from reading your book what happened, but tell folks who haven't read the book how long it took you and what happened to you and how you came back. Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, it was a couple-year journey, and I went to my heart doctor, and he wanted to prescribe me some anxiety pills as well as blood pressure pills. Well, blood pressure pills are okay, but anxiety pills are not okay. And when he pushed prescription toward me, I said to myself, well, you know, I can't take this, doc. And
the anxiety stuff.
The anxiety prescription. And then it was revealed to me in this conversation that I had that many people in my profession, pilots, struggle with depression and anxiety. And then what happens, he explained to me, is that pilots go underground and they self-medicate or they don't medicate at all.
Okay.
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
So after I left my doctor's office, I had the prescriptions in hand, never filled them, but it was so ironic that I took myself off of flight status to figure out what I was going to do next. And through that evolution, I it was brought to my attention a functional medicine doctor who I went to see, and she introduced me to a few blood tests that were not standard. And she figured out that I had high mercury in my blood that was giving me the secondary symptom of high blood pressure, which I detoxified myself over a couple months period. But the anxiety, she introduced me to mindfulness meditation, and I've been a mindfulness practitioner now for 15 years.
And I have a feeling if you could wave a magic wand and get every pilot to do it right now, you would do that. But let's get to what you were about to say before I ask you about your personal story. So you started looking into the mental health issue of pilots, emotional. I mean, I presume physical a bit too. Obviously, blood pressure would be physical, but emotional and mental issues. And you formed a group. Tell us about that.
Yes, with that, I became a health coach too, because I was so dedicated to the pilot profession and the health that we need to stay healthy, not only for us, but for our families and for the organization.
Right.
And in my generation, mental health is not a word that is very popular. We can talk about gut health, we can talk about oral health, but the moment we talk about mental health.
No, we can talk about sex, we can talk about anything, but mental health is very, very touchy, right?
Right, very taboo. However, what I have discovered is that the new generation, Generation Y and Generation Z, they are more open and available to talking about their mental health.
Right.
And so I became very, very interested in the new aviators. And so I'm well aware of the pending health crisis that we have on our college campuses. And, then you throw in a pandemic, and you throw in isolation,
right,
and the feeling of loneliness, and we have a recipe for concern. And it's just not programs at the collegiate level. It's across the board in business. We have an epidemic of chronic stress. So I decided to create this company. It's called Piloting to Wellbeing. Let's
say that slowly again. Piloting, then the number 2, Wellbeing. And that's also your website.
Correct.
Piloting, the number 2, wellbeing.com.
Correct. And we focus on programs on the collegiate level that we can offer the collegiate aviation students, that they could create a program that is more holistic. There are 5 competencies in aviation, and let's see if I can remember it. It's technical skills, communication, situational awareness, decision making, and there's one more. And we are very highly trained, but we have to do more for our young aviators, because just like a professional athlete who trains to excellence, they have their coaches, or they have their techniques to create more or better skills in basketball or football or whatever sport that is. But on the other side, they also have skills that teach them nutrition and relaxation and exercise and movement and community, the pillars that supports you. You just can't have the technical side, because a pilot or anyone becomes imbalanced. And when they go through a life of imbalance, then they fall into the pit holes of aviation disasters.
Do you think you have helped any particular pilots be better pilots, or save their lives perhaps, or the lives of their passengers, or save their careers?
I can't.
I mean, it's hard to say what would have happened if you hadn't intervened. But right. I mean, yeah. Right. But you feel people have walked into your office and walked out better.
Absolutely.
To shorten it.
In fact, I get calls at least once a week from pilots who have read my book
Right.
and ask me, I need help with insomnia. I need help. Can you guide me? I took a suicide call a few years back,
Ah,
and from one of our pilots, and I was able to get him to safety. And and after a few years away from aviation, he is now back on the line.
I have a friend who is, I guess, his late 50s, maybe I can't remember, early 60s now, but he was a private pilot he still is. He's still a licensed private pilot. The guy cannot get on a commercial jet to save his life. I mean, he'll break out, if he's thinking about it, he breaks out in his sweat. He's got a fear of flying. And whenever I say that, he says, I don't have a fear of flying. I'm just not in control. And so here's a guy who's got a private, he knows what keeps a plane up. He's not going, oh, sure, big heavy metal thing. How's it staying in the air? He knows everything because he can fly. But he won't get on a private plane because he's afraid maybe the pilot had a bad day or bad week or bad year. And this is the one day this pilot is going to forget, the spacing between planes in the sky, which is it's an art. I mean, sometimes you can look at the thing in the dashboard and it tells you, but sometimes it gets messy. And maybe he's had a bad day. He's not focusing on that. He's going to crash into another plane in the sky, or he's going to fly into the side. This guy will not fly in a commercial flight, and he guy's a pilot. That's weird to me.
Yeah, well, he knows, and don't get me wrong. I'm not conveying that all pilots have a mental health condition.
I know you're not. But it does cross someone's mind if they think about it.
Absolutely, because
a passenger's mind. So.
Right, and we're humans, and we struggle. Like I said at the beginning of your program, more so just because of the nature of our business.
Because you're supposed to be Superman and Superwoman.
We're supposed to be Superman, Superwoman, and we suffer from anxiety and depression, even though the prevalence isn't the same.
Right.
We suffer from anxiety and depression because of the atmosphere that we live in, and that is being away all the time, not getting the right sleep, not getting the right nutrition, going around the world. Our circadian clock is really irregular, and from that, we know that our body is connected. Our health is connected by more than our neck. Our mind and our body, our head and our body is connected by a very intricate system. So what you think affects your body, and how your body feels affects your mind.
And performance. Right.
And performance. And performance equals safety in the skies.
So what's to be done? What is to be done to get pilots feeling more comfortable about during their required physicals to be openly honest about issues? And let's start with that. What is to be done?
Well, there's not too much being done, but we are taking steps forward. And I'm working with a doctor, Dr. Hoffman. He's an aerospace researcher, and he has conducted 2 surveys, one back in 2019 and one that has just closed in 2020. And we have surveyed over 4,000 pilots in the 2020 survey, and we're coming up with data that we can present to the FAA. And once that data gets into the hands of the FAA, hopefully they are in the position to start making changes.
So who does that? Does the FAA make changes in the requirements for a pilot, or the restrictions on pilots, or is it Congress? Who has the power and authority and the wisdom even to change things?
Well, it starts with the FAA. They're a government regulatory agency. Excuse me. And excuse me, I need a...
Please, no, go ahead. I understand. If you just tuned in, Renee is just getting over a bad case of laryngitis, and so she has every permission to drink all the water she needs to keep going, and we thank her for toughing through this.
Thank you very much.
By the way, let me reintroduce you, Renee, because some people come in the middle and go, who's Renee O'Shaughnessy? Renee O'Shaughnessy is the author of this book. Oops, sorry. It's called "This Is Your Captain Speaking." You can see the subtitle up at the top: "What You Should Know About Your Pilot's Mental Health." And the thrust of the book is that pilots have, there you go, it's a much better picture of, right? Pilots have as much trauma, that's maybe too big a word, as many issues in their lives as others of us have. However, not all of us have to worried about, altitude. What's that called? There's some word for it. Altitude separate.
It's called
Awareness, altitude awareness, right?
altitude awareness.
Which planes that fly like that.
Right.
I don't know if people know this, but when you're flying across the Atlantic going this way, there are other planes coming this way, and what's keeping them from bumping into each other is not because they're going way around Antarctica. I mean, the North Pole, excuse me. They're going under each other or over each other. So
Right.
altitude awareness is important. So, the thrust of Renee O'Shaughnessy's interest now, she's retired from 3 decades of flying for FedEx, is that pilots who have to undergo physicals often don't share with the doctors who must certify them to keep flying that they might be suffering from depression or some kind of addiction, maybe, or just bad things, because they might lose their license and lose their profession. So that's what we're talking about. So I was asking you what, Renee, now that I've reintroduced you, asking you who FAA can change things, and how do they do that? How do you get a pilot to go for his or her physical and say and be openly honest, unless they're really in a crisis and have to blurt it out?
You're absolutely right. So, and the short answer is there's nothing we can do right now to convince the pilot, even though he is bound, by his ethics to tell the truth.
Right.
Let me digress here. I mentioned Dr. Hoffman and the
Right.
survey that he just posed up. One of the questions that he posed on the survey was, have you ever felt worried about seeking medical care because of your career? And would you like to guess or take a guess of what percentage of pilots out of the 4,400 pilots, what they said?
I'm almost afraid to. Out of 4,400 pilots, how many admitted that they're sometimes that they're reluctant to be openly honest about a situation when undergoing their medical exam? Half of them.
We found that almost 80% of pilots answered yes.
80%.
80%.
That's
And this one of the first numbers published, trying to define the prevalence of such an issue, a non-flying pilot, for example, lying on a medical, they admitted that only 30% only lie on physicals, but pilots, 80% do not tell the complete truth on their FAA physical. Yeah. So, and the other question was, have you ever delayed medical care, or specifically because of your fear of losing your certificate? 60% of pilots answered yes.
That's tough. So how would you, if you were emperor of the world, how would you change the law? What is it that, I mean, can you tell pilots, look, be honest, and we're not going to fire you, but we need to know these things, and maybe you should take some time off with pay or something, so they're not afraid they're going to lose their house or their family. What's the?
Well, we have a system in place through our union that is peer-to-peer, and they encourage you to go to this peer-to-peer and talk to someone about your struggle, whether it's in the airplane, a training event, or life just is coming at you hard. The problem with those programs, and I was part of those programs, pilots aren't utilizing them because they don't trust their airline, they don't trust their union, and they're sure as hell not going to trust a pilot that they don't even know.
Yeah, makes sense.
So getting back to your question, do you remember back in the day, Rudy, when pilots couldn't wear glasses?
They could not wear glasses?
No. You need to be
I
20.
vaguely, now that you mention it, I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but yeah, I vaguely remember that. They had to have perfect airside to fly, right?
Perfect airside.
eyesight to fly.
Could not have any corrected vision. The FAA changed that when they realized how ridiculous that was.
Yeah, it was a little crazy.
And back in the day, you couldn't pilot an airplane, a commercial airliner, if you lost a limb, if you lost a leg, if you lost fingers. But now the FAA changed that rule that if you demonstrate proficiency, then you can fly.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Prior to 2010, pilots who suffered from anxiety and depression, as I said, either went underground or they didn't medicate. Underground meaning they took medication that was not prescribed to them by an aeromedical doctor, right?
Medical doctor who reported to the airlines or whatever. Yeah, right.
Correct. But then in 2010, the FAA approved 4 SSRIs that pilots can take on a case-by-case basis. So what that means?
Or what? You used some initials there, right? Acronym. What was that?
On a case-by-case basis.
But you said they could take 4.
SSRI. That's an acronym for serotonin inhibitors.
Okay, a certain kind of medication.
It's basically depression medicine or any mind-altering medication.
Okay.
But the FAA, through a series of, tests and literature, decided we'd rather have a pilot medicated and under doctor's care than not medicating at all.
Than hiding it.
But the kicker is you could only take one of the 4. So now if pilots can't take one of the 4, they're exposing themselves to taking themselves off the line and losing their job.
Right.
So only if they take one of the 4 approved medication, they may be able to fly. But a maybe isn't good enough for a commercial pilot who spends tens of thousands of dollars in training that they may get their job back. So they keep it quiet until they can't keep it quiet anymore.
So is that one of the things that you and fellow like-minded pilots would like to change? That if I'm brutally honest and tell you, and I can deal with this problem, and I'm better 6 months, a year, or 2 years later, I can have my job back.
Yes, but that's going to take a lot of change in the current regulation and legislation. Right. So for a year back in, I think 2010, they did have an amnesty program. So any pilot that came forward and said, yes, I am under medication, and you didn't know about it, he or she was forgiven. But that was only a 1-year amnesty.
Why?
That's just the way the program was set up.
I presume you would like to have that as a regular thing.
Absolutely. A pilot, a pilot, I talk about in the book, it's not an expose of what goes on behind closed doors. Right. It's more about bringing awareness to the public, to the industry, to organizations that pilots, like other individuals, have the right to seek either medical or mental health care, just like anyone else, without any consequence to their livelihood.
Do you find any support for this in the FAA or within particular congressional offices, particularly those Congress people who have some jurisdiction over aviation?
They agree.
Okay. So are there plans afoot? Is somebody lobbying? I mean, you guys are, obviously.
Yeah, well, we're talking to the FAA, we're talking to ALPA, and they know this is a problem. So as I said, once we get all this data in front of them, and having summits, and we keep talking about the things that they don't want to hear, I think through that part of education and awareness, we will come,
Do you know if anyone in the Airline Pilots Association, at least in the executive ranks, have seen this study showing this alarming number of pilots saying, yeah, I've lied?
Yeah, they just saw it on December the 15th.
They saw it on December 15th, 2021.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody's eyebrows arch, or did they go, "Oh yeah, we knew that"? No.
Yeah, no, they arched.
Good.
They
They,
arched.
they were
They
shocked
arched.
as I was.
They
Yeah.
were shocked. They thought most of them said, the question, Dr. Hoffman posed the question, what percentage do you think? And one, 0 to 20, and a few hands went up. And then, okay, 20 to 50%. Most of the hands went up.
Mhm.
And then over 80%, that's when they were shocked.
It
So
is.
it's it's a problem that doesn't need to be a problem. We just want to create solutions, not only in the airline level, but at collegiate levels. So the aviators that are coming up through the ranks know that there is a choice, and we want to be more proactive than reactive in our health, our physical health, as well as our mental health.
And do you find, I don't know if you flight training schools or colleges, you say you're trying to get to the collegiate age, future pilots. Do you find a welcoming attitude among those parties?
Oh, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. On the collegiate level, they are so open and available to talk about this stress that they're having, that I look so forward in working with universities and aviation schools to bring programs to them, and perhaps bring a mentoring system to that particular college if they would have the need. But I have a few ideas that the P2W team are developing right now.
Good. Before we say goodbye to you, I want to ask you, when you get on a plane, do you size up the pilot in some way?
I just hope he or she's having a good day.
You just hope he or she's having a good day?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't go in and say, "How you feeling?
Yeah. No,
Everything okay?"
Sometimes I hand them my book.
Right. That's a nice thing.
Yeah.
Well, hey, O'Shaughnessy, is there something you'd like to say before we say goodbye? Is there something I didn't ask you that you would wish I had asked you?
One thing that let's see, I'm always asked is, how do I deal with sleep?
Good question. Yes. How do pilots? How did you? And how should pilots deal with sleep too?
Well, I should have started saying, often I'm asked how I overcome stress and sleep deprivation traveling all around the world. And my response isn't anything like you would think it would be. It isn't hot yoga or Pilates or hydration or nutrition. And don't get me wrong, those are all important things.
Sure.
But my number one priority for all overall health and well-being is getting a good night's sleep. There's nothing more important to my body and stress recovery than sleep. And basically, the research that I've done on sleep, when I was at UC Berkeley under one of my professor who is a expert in sleep deprivation, that sleep is it's like breathing. Sleep is the most natural thing you can do to take care of yourself. And it is the number one thing that impacts your immune system to keep you healthy and strong.
And do you think that pilots who are crossing, 6 time zones when they go across the Atlantic, or even more across the Pacific, do you think they are given adequate time before they fly again?
No.
I know there are rules about this. I mean, they have to have X number of hours or days off. Do you think current regulations are adequate?
I think the current regulations are adequate in theory, but if you have a pilot that can't fall asleep in Guangzhou because his body clock is still on New York time,
Mm-hmm.
That poses a problem for his next flight. And then his next flight, he might end up in, South Africa and still not sleeping.
Yeah.
And it's a snowball effect until he has insomniatic symptoms. And when you can't sleep at night, it impacts your overall health.
Is there something that can be done about that?
There isn't anything. The only thing that you can try to do is what I did, is stayed on a normal sleep pattern. And that is when it's 6 o'clock at night or at 9 o'clock at night, my body is saying it's time to go to sleep.
No matter where you are.
No matter where you are.
Okay.
So try to navigate those type of circadian levels that your body is used to and wants to. The body is not made to be traveling around the clock 24/7 or every month. The body is not designed to do that. The body's designed to sleep, and that's how it rejuvenates. That's how it renews, and that's how your longevity. Pilots, for a while there, I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but pilots, you only make it 2 or 3 years after retirement.
Whoa, that's an unhappy number. Do you happen to know offhand how many nights a pilot who flies transatlantic can rest before the next flight, or trans-Pacific, or not can, is permitted to, I should say?
It's not nights, Rudy. It's hours.
It's hours, okay. Do you happen to know those numbers?
Oh, you might get into Guangzhou, because it's different for every, like if you fly the MD-11 or the 777, you need a minimum of 12 hours to 14 hours off duty before you go to your next flight. It could be reduced. It could be reduced on an operational emergency. For example, if there's a typhoon coming into Hong Kong and they want to get the airplane there before the typhoon hits, then it could be reduced to no less than 8 hours.
Do those considerations take in any taking a nap during the flight on the plane?
On the long haulers, we do have sleep beds, and we do utilize them. Okay. However, the question remains, that's not good quality sleep.
Right.
It's just a nap. Yeah. And it rejuvenates the battery and it gets you to your destination, but it really doesn't renew your overall health by taking these naps day after day or month after month, year after year. Someone like myself with a 35-year career.
Well, Renee Shaughnessy, we've taken advantage of your 35-year career, and I thank you for letting us talk to you even as your throat is healing. And the book is, I don't know if Tommy's there to put it up on the screen, but if not, I'll put it up right here. This is your captain speaking. There it is. Much better that way. That is the book. The website again, Renee, is?
Piloting2wellbeing.com. And if you'd like to buy my book, it's on Amazon. And it also is on my landing page, CaptainReneeO.com. And that's Renee with Reyne.
Yes, unusual spelling, as you can see here, of Renee, REYNEO.com. That's it? ReneeO.com.
CaptainReneeO.com, yes.
Captain, full CAPT or the full word?
The full word.
Okay, spell out Captain Renee, REYNEO.com.
Yes.
Captain O'Shaughnessy, thanks for joining us today. Very interesting, and certainly has given us all of her passengers something to think about and hope for better days. And thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Take care now. I'm Rudy Maxa. I'm coming to you from, you can see from the palm trees and the pool in the background, to balmy Naples, Florida. Actually, we're going to do, normally we do these every 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to do one on Thursday. I'll be here in the same venue. We're going to talk to a man who was hired for 3 years to work with the TSA, to work on very high-tech, I should say, ways to get us through security faster and more safely for everybody. I know folks who have to wait in line in security lines at airports will be very interested in that. He's a really smart guy. I've talked to him for about an hour about coming on. He's going to come on next Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll do that next week. I'll be here again. Then I'll be back to frigid St. Paul, Minnesota for a good part of the winter after that. Meanwhile, if you don't get my newsletter, it's free. It's every 2 weeks. It's very gossipy. Gossipy is the wrong word. It's very short items about travel, what you might need to know, what you might find interesting about new COVID rules in other destinations, deals, interesting hotel, funny stories. You can subscribe by going to maxatours.com/newsletter. And at Maxatours, you can check out some of our European, small group European deluxe tours there as well. But go to maxatours.com/newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter. First name, last name, email. That's all you got to do. I'm not selling you anything there. I'm not going to give your email address to anybody. But I'll share my thoughts during the week or every 2 weeks on travel, etc. Meanwhile, for today, thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again next Thursday. Keep in mind, this is a January 13th, 2021 broadcast. We're still in the COVID travel season. So if you're watching this later on Facebook or YouTube, you will understand my references to COVID and my guests' references to COVID. See you in about a week. That would be January 20th, a Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.